Hey everyone, I'm Cassandra Rivera, and 3 months ago, my sister Brooke destroyed the one thing I treasured most in this world. She claimed it was an accident, swore on our grandmother's grave that she never meant for it to happen. But accidents don't involve deleting dashcam footage, and accidents don't require covering up evidence with lies that unravel your entire family. What she didn't know was that destroying my car would lead me straight back to the man she was about to marry. My ex-husband, Tyler, who never knew the real reason our marriage ended. Now she's 3 weeks away from walking down the aisle, and I'm the maid of honor she specifically requested. Some sisters share clothes and secrets. We're about to share a very different kind of revelation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Texas heat was already unbearable at 9 in the morning when I pulled into the Whole Foods parking lot on Lamar Boulevard. My Honda Civic gleamed under the harsh Austin sun, every surface polished to perfection. I'd spent the previous evening detailing every inch of that car, from the chrome accents to the leather seats I'd saved for 8 months to afford. It wasn't just transportation to me, it was freedom, independence, and the first major purchase I'd made entirely on my own after my divorce 2 years earlier. I was meeting Brooke for what she'd called an emergency sister brunch, though with Brooke emergencies usually involved which Instagram filter made her look more ethereal, or whether her engagement photos captured her authentic vulnerability. Still, she was my only sister, and despite our complicated relationship, I'd learned to navigate her dramatic tendencies with patience that bordered on sainthood. The coffee shop was crowded with the usual Austin crowd, tech workers in vintage band shirts, yoga instructors with green smoothies, and university students, hunched over laptops with the intensity of people who believed their term papers might change the world. I spotted Brooke immediately. She sat at a corner table, perfectly positioned so the morning light hit her face at the most flattering angle, her phone propped against a mason jar as she recorded what appeared to be a spontaneous moment of contemplation for her social media followers. She looked up as I approached, and her smile was the same dazzling expression that had charmed teachers, boyfriends, and eventually our parents into believing she could do no wrong. Brooke had always possessed an effortless beauty that made people want to protect her, to smooth the path ahead so she never had to stumble. Where I was practical and measured, she was spontaneous and magnetic. Where I worked overtime to afford my car payments, she had somehow convinced our parents to co-sign for a brand new Jeep Wrangler that she treated like a disposable accessory. "Cass, thank God you're here," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand with the urgency of someone announcing a natural disaster. "I've been sitting here having a complete breakdown about the wedding timeline." I settled into the chair across from her, already mentally preparing for whatever crisis would require my problem-solving skills and emotional labor. This was our dynamic. Brooke created chaos and I cleaned it up. She generated drama, and I provided stability. It had been this way since we were children, and somewhere along the way, I'd accepted it as the price of maintaining our relationship. "What's wrong with the timeline?" I asked, pulling out my phone to check the detailed schedule I'd helped her create 3 weeks early. As her maid of honor, I'd taken on more responsibility than most wedding planners, coordinating everything from the rehearsal dinner to the morning of timeline, to ensure her day would be perfect. "It's Tyler," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to sound both intimate and performative. "He's been acting so strange lately. Distant. Like he's having second thoughts or something." The mention of Tyler's name sent an uncomfortable jolt through my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced every time Brooke had gushed about her perfect relationship over the past 18 months. Tyler Harrison had been my husband for 3 years, and the love of my life until the day I discovered text messages on his phone that shattered everything I thought I knew about our marriage. The divorce had been swift and decisive. I'd packed my belongings, filed the papers, and moved into a small apartment downtown without ever telling him exactly what I'd found. What made Brooke's relationship with Tyler particularly complicated was that she'd met him at a coffee shop 6 months after our divorce was finalized, completely unaware of our history. By the time I learned they were dating, they were already inseparable, and Tyler apparently hadn't mentioned his previous marriage. When Brooke introduced us at a family dinner, the shock on Tyler's face had been matched only by my own careful composure as I shook his hand and pretended we were meeting for the first time. "Maybe he's just nervous," I offered, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Big life changes affect people differently." That's what I thought too, but last night he was going through his phone, deleting things, photos, messages, old emails. When I asked him about it, he said he was just clearing space, but who deletes photos right before their wedding? Brooke's eyes filled with tears that somehow managed to make her look even more beautiful, like a tragic heroine in a romantic movie. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Tyler's habit of deleting evidence had been one of the red flags I'd ignored during our marriage, always explained away with reasonable excuses, until the pattern became undeniable. But discussing Tyler's suspicious behavior with the woman who was about to marry him felt like navigating a minefield while blindfolded. "Have you talked to him directly about your concerns?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Brooke had never been one for direct confrontation when she could achieve her goals through tears and manipulation. "I can't," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "What if I'm just being paranoid? What if bringing it up makes things worse? You know how men hate it when we overthink things." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Brooke alternating between wedding anxiety and detailed descriptions of her dress, the flowers, and the photographer she'd hired, who specialized in capturing authentic emotional moments. I listened with the practiced patience of someone who had learned to provide emotional support without offering opinions that might be used against me later. As we prepared to leave, Brooke suddenly grabbed my arm with genuine urgency. "Cass, I need to ask you for a huge favor. I know it's last minute, but could I borrow your car for a few hours this afternoon? The Jeep is making that weird noise again, and I have to pick up my wedding shoes from Nordstrom and then meet with the florist to approve the final arrangement. Tyler's at work, and I really don't want to take the Jeep on the highway if something's wrong with it." The request caught me off guard. Brooke had never asked to borrow my car before, partly because she knew how much it meant to me, and partly because she'd always had other options. But the wedding was in 3 weeks, and I could see the genuine stress beneath her usual dramatic flair. "I guess that would be okay," I said slowly, "but I need it back by 6 because I have dinner plans with Natalie." "You're literally the best sister in the world," Brooke said, throwing her arms around me in a hug that smelled like expensive perfume and desperation. "I promise I'll take perfect care of it. You know how careful I am with other people's things." We exchanged keys in the parking lot, and I watched her adjust the seat and mirrors with the careful attention of someone who understood they were being trusted with something precious. My Honda started with its familiar gentle purr, and Brooke waved through the window as she pulled out of the parking space with the cautious movements of a new driver. I climbed into her Jeep, immediately noticing the clutter that filled every available surface: fast food containers, empty coffee cups, makeup scattered across the dashboard, and at least 3 different phone chargers tangled around the gear shift. The contrast with my meticulously maintained car was stark, but I pushed down my discomfort and focused on getting home safely. The afternoon passed peacefully. I caught up on work emails, did some laundry, and prepared for my dinner with Natalie, my best friend since college who had become my primary source of sanity during the chaos of the past 2 years. Natalie knew about my history with Tyler, though she didn't know about my current role in his upcoming wedding. Some secrets were too complicated to share, even with the people closest to you. At 5:30, my phone rang. Brooke's name appeared on the screen, but instead of her usual cheerful greeting, I heard sobbing so intense I could barely understand her words. "Cass. Oh my God, Cass. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There was an accident, and I don't know what to do, and the police are here, and everything is ruined." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the phone with white knuckles, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Brooke, slow down. Are you hurt? What happened?" "I'm okay. I'm not hurt. But Cass, your car, your beautiful car, it's gone. It's completely destroyed, and it's all my fault, and I don't know how to fix this." The words hit me like physical blows. I sat down heavily on my couch, struggling to process what she was telling me. "What do you mean destroyed? What kind of accident?" Through her tears, the story emerged in fragments. She'd been driving down South First Street when a delivery truck ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my Honda. The impact had been so severe that the car had rolled twice before coming to rest against a light pole. The truck driver was uninsured, and my car was completely totaled, a twisted mass of metal that bore no resemblance to the pristine vehicle I'd entrusted to her that morning. I called the police, and they filed a report, but the guy who hit me doesn't have insurance, and his license was suspended. They arrested him, but that doesn't bring back your car. Brooke's voice was thick with tears and guilt. Cass, I know how much that car meant to you. I know it was more than just a car. I closed my eyes, feeling tears burn behind my eyelids. She was right. It had been more than just a car. It had been my independence, my fresh start, my proof that I could rebuild my life after everything fell apart. And now it was gone, destroyed while in the care of someone who had never truly understood what it meant to work for something you treasured. Where are you now? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. At the police station downtown. They needed me to give a statement. Tyler's on his way to pick me up. Cass, I'm going to make this right somehow. I promise. My insurance will cover it, or I'll find a way to replace it. I'll do whatever it takes. But even as she made these promises, I could hear the hollowness in. Brooke had never had to make anything right before. Problems were always solved by other people. Our parents, her friends, or the various men who fell under her spell. She lived in a world where consequences were theoretical and damage could always be undone with enough tears and charm. I hung up the phone and sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by silence that felt heavier than grief. The practical part of my mind was already calculating insurance claims, rental car costs, and the months it would take to save for another vehicle. But beneath the logistics was a deeper pain. The recognition that once again I had trusted Brooke with something important, and once again I was left to deal with the aftermath of her carelessness. That evening, Tyler brought Brooke to my apartment so she could return the Jeep keys and apologize in person. Seeing him in my doorway was jarring. He looked exactly the same, from his carefully styled brown hair to the way he stood with his hands in his pockets when he was uncomfortable. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of our shared history hanging between us like an invisible barrier. Cass, I'm so sorry about what happened, he said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. I know how much that car meant to you. The irony wasn't lost on Tyler. Knew exactly how much the car had meant, because he'd been there when I'd bought it, when I'd spent weekends cleaning it, when I'd proudly driven it to work every day after our divorce. He understood the significance in a way that Brooke, despite her tears and apologies, never could. Brooke stood beside him, her eyes red and swollen, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Cass, I need you to know that I never meant for this to happen. I was being so careful, I was doing everything right, and then this truck came out of nowhere. And I know, I said, cutting off her explanation, I know you didn't mean for it to happen. But as I looked at her face, something nagged at me. There was guilt there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked suspiciously like relief, as if the accident had solved a problem I didn't know existed. It was a fleeting expression, gone so quickly I might have imagined it, but it left me with an uncomfortable feeling that I couldn't quite shake. They stayed for 20 minutes, with Tyler offering to help with insurance calls and Brooke promising to handle all the paperwork. When they left, I stood at my window and watched Tyler's truck disappear down the street, carrying my sister toward their shared future while I remained behind to deal with the wreckage of the present. Over the next few days, the story began to unravel in small ways that made me question everything I thought I knew about the accident. The police report contained inconsistencies that didn't match Brooke's emotional account. According to the official documentation, she'd been traveling well over the speed limit when the collision occurred, and there were no skid marks to suggest she'd attempted to brake before impact. More troubling was a conversation I had with Miss Carter, an elderly family friend who had witnessed the accident from her apartment balcony. When I called to thank her for staying with Brooke until the police arrived, she mentioned details that contradicted my sister's version of events. The strangest thing, Miss Carter said, was that your sister seemed more concerned about her phone than anything else. While we were waiting for the ambulance, she kept trying to get back into the car to retrieve something from the dashboard. I had to physically stop her because the whole vehicle was unstable. When I asked what she'd been trying to retrieve, Mrs. Carter's answer sent a chill down my spine. Some kind of recording device. A small camera. She kept saying she had to get it before the police saw it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, pieces of a puzzle slowly forming in my mind. Brooke's request to borrow my car had been sudden and urgent. Her behavior after the accident had been more theatrical than genuinely traumatic. And now there was evidence of a dashcam, a device I'd never installed in my car that she'd been desperate to retrieve before anyone else could examine it. The next morning, I drove her Jeep to Tony's auto repair, where I'd taken my Honda for routine maintenance. Tony Valdez had worked on cars for 30 years, and his weathered hands could diagnose problems that sophisticated computer systems missed. "Tony," I said, "I need you to look at something for me. My sister says her Jeep has been making strange noises, but I want to know if there's actually anything wrong with it." He popped the hood and spent 20 minutes examining the engine, checking belts, listening to the idle, and testing various systems. When he finished, his expression was puzzled. "Cass, I hate to tell you this, but there's nothing wrong with this vehicle. Engine's running smooth, transmission's solid, no unusual sounds or vibrations. If your sister's been hearing noises, they're either intermittent," he trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air, "or she made them up," I finished. Tony nodded reluctantly. "I've seen it before. Sometimes people create problems when they need an excuse for something else." Driving home, I felt the last pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Brooke hadn't borrowed my car because her Jeep was broken. She'd borrowed it because she'd needed access to something specific, something that required my car to be in a particular place at a particular time. That evening, I called the towing company that had removed my Honda from the accident scene. After being transferred 3 times, I reached a supervisor who was willing to discuss the condition of the vehicle. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like that wreck," he said. The impact pattern was unusual. Most accidents like that, you see evidence of the driver trying to avoid collision, swerving, braking, defensive maneuver, but your car showed none of that. It was almost like, he paused, seemingly reluctant to continue. "Like what?" "Like the driver accelerated into the intersection, instead of trying to stop." The phone slipped from my numb finger. I caught it just before it hit the floor, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The implications of what the supervisor was suggesting were too terrible to fully process, but they explained everything that had seemed wrong about Brooke's story. She hadn't been the victim of a random accident. She had orchestrated the destruction of my car, and she'd done it deliberately. But why? What could she possibly gain from destroying the one thing she knew I treasured most? The answer came to me slowly, like pieces of a nightmare reassembling themselves in the harsh light of consciousness. Tyler's strange behavior, his deleted photos and messages, Brooke's relief beneath her tears, the dashcam she'd been desperate to retrieve. She had discovered something about Tyler, something that threatened her perfect wedding, and her carefully curated life, and somehow that discovery was connected to my car, to evidence that needed to be destroyed before anyone else could find it. I spent the rest of the evening researching dashcam footage, learning about automatic uploads to cloud storage, and trying to understand what kind of evidence might have been captured in my car that Brooke couldn't risk exposing. The technical aspects were beyond my expertise, but the emotional logic was becoming painfully clear. My sister hadn't just destroyed my car by accident, she had destroyed it to cover up a secret that could have ruined her engagement, and she had been willing to sacrifice my most precious possession to protect her own interests, just as she had been willing to sacrifice everything else throughout our lives. The betrayal was deeper than the loss of the car, deeper than the lies and the manipulation. It was the recognition that I had never really mattered to her except as a tool to be used when convenient and discarded when inconvenient. As I sat in the darkness of my apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my trust in the person I'd spent my entire life protecting and supporting, I made a decision that would change everything. If Brooke was willing to destroy my car to hide a secret about Tyler, then perhaps it was time for me to stop hiding secrets of my own. The wedding was still 2.5 weeks away, plenty of time to uncover the truth about what really happened that afternoon on South First Street. Plenty of time to understand why my sister had been willing to commit such an elaborate deception to protect her relationship with my ex-husband, and plenty of time to decide what I was going to do with the knowledge once I had it. Some accidents reveal more than they destroy, and sometimes, the most devastating crashes are the ones that happen when someone finally decides to stop pretending they can't see what's directly in front of them. Tomorrow would begin my investigation into what really happened that day. But tonight, I sat with the ruins of everything I thought I knew about my family, my sister, and the man we had both loved enough to lie for. The truth was going to surface eventually. The only question was whether I would be the one to bring it into the light, or whether I would continue to be the collateral damage in other people's carefully constructed deceptions. For the first time in my life, I chose myself over my sister's comfort, and that choice would lead me down a path that would expose secrets neither of us had been prepared to face. The Austin Public Library on Cesar Chavez Street became my second home over the next week. I chose a corner table near the computer terminals where I could research without interruption, surrounded by the quiet hum of students and job seekers who minded their own business. The familiar smell of old books and industrial carpet created a cocoon of anonymity that I desperately needed while I dug into the truth about my sister's deception. My first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While scrolling through local news websites, I discovered that the intersection where my car was destroyed had been equipped with traffic cameras for the past 6 months. The cameras captured not just red light violations, but also recorded continuous footage that was stored for 30 days before being automatically deleted. If I could access that footage, I might be able to see exactly what happened during those crucial seconds before impact. Getting access to traffic camera footage required either a court order or a formal request through the city attorney's office. Neither option was feasible for a private citizen conducting an unauthorized investigation. But Austin's tech community was notoriously collaborative, and I remembered that Natalie's boyfriend Marcus worked for a digital marketing company that specialized in data recovery and analysis. I met Marcus at a food truck park on South Lamar, the kind of place where conversations could blend into the ambient noise of sizzling meat and reggae music. Marcus Thompson was everything Tyler wasn't: direct, uncomplicated, and completely devoted to Natalie in a way that made their relationship feel effortless. He listened to my carefully edited version of events with the focused attention of someone who solved complex problems for a living. "Traffic camera footage is tricky," he said, stabbing his breakfast taco thoughtfully. "The city contracts with a private company for storage and maintenance. Getting access legally takes forever." But he paused, glancing around the crowded picnic table. "There are companies that specialize in retrieving this kind of data for insurance claims. It's expensive, but it's legitimate." He gave me the contact information for a firm called Austin Data Solutions, explaining that they worked with law firms and insurance companies to recover digital evidence. The consultation fee was $300, money I couldn't easily afford, but the possibility of understanding what really happened was worth the financial strain. 2 days later, I sat in a sterile office building in North Austin, watching Jennifer Walsh, a data recovery specialist, pull up grainy black and white footage on her computer screen. The timestamp showed the exact date and time of the accident, and I held my breath as the familiar intersection appeared on the monitor. "Here's your vehicle," Jennifer said, pointing to a small Honda entering the frame from the right side of the screen. "And here's the delivery truck approaching from the left." What I saw made my stomach drop. The truck was clearly visible as it approached the intersection, and its brake lights were illuminated well before reaching the crosswalk. It was slowing down, not speeding through a red light as Brooke had claimed. More importantly, I could see my Honda's trajectory in the moments before impact. The car wasn't traveling straight through the intersection as it should have. Instead, it veered sharply to the left, directly into the path of the truck. The movement was deliberate and pronounced, not the subtle drift of a distracted driver or the panic swerve of someone trying to avoid collision. "Can you enhance this section?" I asked, pointing to the crucial moments before impact. Jennifer worked her magic with contrast and zoom controls, bringing the footage into sharper focus. What emerged was undeniable evidence that contradicted everything Brooke had told me. The truck driver hadn't run a red light, he'd been proceeding legally through a green light when my car suddenly turned into his lane. Based on this footage, Jennifer said, carefully, it appears that your vehicle was the one that caused the accident. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The truck driver was traveling at a reasonable speed and had the right of way. I stared at the screen, watching the collision play out in slow motion. My beautiful Honda disappeared beneath the much larger delivery truck, rolling and spinning until it came to rest as a mangled sculpture of twisted metal. But more than the destruction, I was transfixed by the deliberate nature of the steering input that had caused it. Is there any way to determine if this was intentional? I asked. Jennifer rewound the footage and played it again, this time focusing on the steering pattern. See how the vehicle maintains its lane until this moment, then makes a sharp turn. That's not consistent with a mechanical failure or a medical emergency. It looks like a conscious decision. I purchased a copy of the footage on a flash drive, my hands shaking as I handed over my credit card. The evidence was damning, but it raised more questions than it answered. Why would Brooke deliberately crash my car? What was she trying to hide or destroy? The answer came to me during the drive home, as pieces of the puzzle finally began forming a coherent picture. The dashcam she'd been desperate to retrieve wasn't something I'd installed, it was something she'd installed. She'd borrowed my car not because her Jeep was broken, but because she needed to record something, and she needed to do it in a vehicle that wouldn't be connected to her. By the time I reached my apartment, I was certain that Brooke had used my car for surveillance. She'd suspected Tyler of something cheating, lying, or some other betrayal, and she'd used my Honda to follow him and gather evidence. When she'd discovered whatever she was looking for, she'd realized that the footage was too dangerous to keep, but also too incriminating to simply delete. The only way to ensure it could never surface was to destroy the entire recording device in a way that looked accidental. The next morning, I called the auto parts store where I'd purchased my car maintenance supplies and asked about dashcam installation. The sales associate explained that modern dashcams often came with wireless capabilities, automatically uploading footage to cloud storage accounts for backup purposes. Even if the device is destroyed, he said, the footage might still exist in the cloud if the camera was connected to Wi-Fi or cellular data. I spent the afternoon researching dashcam cloud storage, learning about automatic backup systems and recovery procedures. Most companies offered free storage for 30 to 60 days, with premium accounts providing longer retention periods. If Brooke had installed a dashcam in my car and connected it to an account, there was a chance the footage still existed somewhere in cyberspace. The challenge was identifying which company an account had been used. Without access to Brooke's devices or passwords, I needed a different approach. I decided to start with the most obvious possibility: Tyler himself. That evening, I composed a text message that took me 45 minutes to write and rewrite. The tone had to be perfect, concerned but not suspicious, helpful but not intrusive. Tyler, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about the accident with my car, and I'm wondering if you might have any insight into why Brooke was so upset about retrieving something from the dashboard. The police report mentioned a recording device, and I'm trying to understand what happened for insurance purposes. Any information would be helpful. I sent the message before I could second-guess myself, then sat staring at my phone waiting for a response that might not come. Tyler and I had maintained carefully polite contact since his relationship with Brooke began, but we'd never discussed anything more personal than weather and mutual acquaintances. His reply came 3 hours later. Can we talk in person? This isn't something I want to discuss over text. We arranged to meet the next afternoon at Radio Coffee on Barton Springs Road, a busy cafe where our conversation would be lost in the ambient noise of espresso machines and laptop keyboards. I arrived early and chose a table near the back where we could speak privately without being overheard. Tyler looked tired when he walked in, the kind of exhaustion that came from sleepless nights and unresolved stress. He ordered black coffee and sat down across from me, his hands wrapped around the cup like he was trying to absorb its warmth. Cass, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me that you'll hear me out before you react. I nodded, though my heart was already racing with anticipation. Brooke has been following me for weeks, maybe months. I started noticing the same car behind me at different times and places: grocery store, gym, work parking lot. At first I thought I was being paranoid, but then I saw her. He paused, taking a sip of coffee that seemed to steady his nerve. Last month I was having lunch with a coworker, and I spotted your Honda parked across the street. I could see someone in the driver's seat with binoculars, and when I looked closer, I realized it was Brooke. She was taking pictures of me through the restaurant window. The revelation hit me like cold water. My car had been used to stalk my ex-husband by the woman who was about to become his wife. The irony was so twisted that I almost laughed. Did you confront her about it? When I got home that night, I asked her directly if she'd been following me. She denied it completely, said I was being paranoid and stressed about the wedding. She was so convincing that I almost believed her. Except what? Except, I'd taken a photo of your car with my phone. I showed it to her, and she went completely white. Then she started crying and said she'd borrowed your car to drive by her ex-boyfriend's house because she was worried he might show up at our wedding and cause trouble. Tyler pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos until he found the image he was looking for. There was my Honda parked across from a downtown restaurant, clearly visible through the telephoto lens of his camera. Even through the windshield glare, I could make out a figure in the driver's seat holding what appeared to be a long lens camera. The story about the ex-boyfriend didn't make sense. Tyler continued. Brooke dated plenty of guys before me, but none of them were serious enough to stalk her at our wedding. I started paying closer attention to her behavior, and I noticed other things. What kind of things? Phone calls that she'd end abruptly when I walked into the room. Apps on her phone that I didn't recognize. Credit card charges for surveillance equipment that she claimed were wedding decorations. Tyler's voice was getting quieter, as if speaking the words aloud made them more real. I think she hired a private investigator to look into my background. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Brooke hadn't just been conducting amateur surveillance, she'd been running a professional investigation into the man she was planning to marry. And somewhere in that investigation, she'd discovered something that threatened their relationship. Tyler, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He nodded, though I could see wariness creeping into his expression. Is there anything in your past that would give her a reason to be suspicious? Anything that might explain why she felt the need to investigate you? Tyler was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained answers he didn't want to acknowledge. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a guilt I recognized from our marriage. There's something I never told her about us, about why we got divorced. My heart clenched. I'd spent 2 years believing that Tyler had never understood the real reason our marriage ended, but apparently, he'd known all along. You knew about the affair. I knew you found the messages on my phone. I knew you saw the photo. I just never understood why you didn't confront me about it. Why you just left. The old pain rose up in my chest, sharp and immediate despite the time that had passed. Because I couldn't bear to hear you lie to me again. Because I realized that if you could deceive me so easily, our entire marriage had been built on false foundations. Tyler closed his eyes. It wasn't an affair, Cass. Not really. It was complicated. Complicated how? The woman in the photos was my ex-girlfriend from college, Rachel. She'd been going through a difficult divorce, and she reached out to me for emotional support. The messages you saw were me, trying to help her through a custody battle. I stared at him, feeling the familiar anger that had driven me to file for divorce. Tyler, I saw the photo. I saw the hotel room. I saw you kissing her. One time, one moment of weakness when she was crying about losing her kids, and I comforted her in a way that crossed boundaries I should have respected. It was wrong, and I regretted it immediately, but it wasn't an ongoing affair. Then why didn't you tell me that when I left? Why did you let me believe the worst? Tyler's voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was ashamed. Because I knew that even if it wasn't a full affair, I'd still betrayed your trust. Because I thought if I told you the truth, you'd see how weak and selfish I was, and you'd leave anyway. We sat in silence, the weight of 2 years of misunderstanding settling between us like a wall. I'd built my entire post-divorce identity around the assumption that Tyler was a serial cheater who had never loved me enough to be faithful. Learning that the reality was more nuanced didn't erase the pain, but it complicated my feelings in ways I wasn't prepared to handle. "Does Brooke know about Rachel?" I asked. "I don't think so. I never mentioned my previous marriage, and I certainly never told her why it ended, but if she hired a private investigator, the implication hung in the air between us. If Brooke had discovered Tyler's history with me, she would have learned about the circumstances surrounding our divorce, and if she'd learned about Rachel, she might have jumped to the same conclusions I had 2 years early. Tyler, if Brooke found out that you were married before, and if she discovered what she thought was evidence of cheating, what do you think she would do?" He considered the question, his face growing pale, as he worked through the possibilities. "She'd confront me, she'd demand explanation. She might call off the wedding, or," I said slowly, "she might decide to gather more evidence before making any decisions. She might want to be absolutely certain before destroying her carefully planned future." Understanding dawned in Tyler's eyes. The dashcam. She was recording me to see if I was still in contact with Rachel, and when she realized that whatever she'd captured was either inconclusive or potentially embarrassing to her, she decided to destroy the evidence in a way that couldn't be traced back to her surveillance activity. Tyler shook his head in disbelief. "She destroyed your car to cover up the fact that she'd been spying on me. That's my theory. But Tyler, there's something else you need to know." I pulled out my phone and showed him the traffic camera footage that Jennifer had enhanced. We watched in silence as my Honda deliberately veered into the path of the delivery truck, creating a collision that had been entirely preventable. "Jesus Christ," Tyler whispered. "She could have been killed, or she could have killed someone else." The truck driver was lucky he wasn't seriously injured. Tyler stared at the screen, watching the accident replay in horrifying detail. "This isn't the woman I thought I was marrying. This level of deception, this willingness to risk people's lives to cover up her own mistake. Tyler, what are you going to do with this information?" He was quiet for a long time, wrestling with implications that would reshape his entire future. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but sad. "I need to know what she recorded. I need to understand what she discovered that made her willing to go to such extreme lengths to hide it. And if what she recorded proves that your relationship is built on lies and surveillance, then I need to know that too." We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to work together to uncover the full truth about what Brooke had been doing with my car. It felt strange to be collaborating with my ex-husband against my sister, but the alternative was allowing her deception to continue unchallenged. As Tyler prepared to leave, he turned back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Cass, can I ask you something?" I nodded. "If you'd known the truth about Rachel from the beginning, if I'd been honest with you about what happened, do you think we could have worked things out?" It was a question I'd avoided thinking about for 2 years, but sitting across from him in the coffee shop where we'd once planned our own future, I found myself considering it seriously. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe." But Tyler, the bigger problem wasn't the mistake you made with Rachel. It was the pattern of small deceptions that made me question everything else. The deleted messages, the unexplained absences, the feeling that you were always hiding something from me. Like Brooke is hiding things from me now. Exactly like that. Tyler nodded slowly, understanding passing between us like a shared recognition of patterns we'd both learned to identify too late. After he left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour processing everything I'd learned. My sister had used my car to conduct surveillance on her fiancé, discovered something that threatened their relationship, and then destroyed the evidence by staging an accident that could have killed innocent people. The level of calculated deception was breathtaking, but what disturbed me most was the realization that this was probably not an isolated incident. Brooke had always been manipulative, but I'd attributed her behavior to selfishness and immaturity rather than genuine malice. This investigation had revealed someone capable of elaborate planning and ruthless execution, someone who would sacrifice other people's property and safety to protect her own interests. That evening, I called Natalie and asked if she could come over. I needed to talk to someone who knew both me and Brooke, someone who could help me process what I'd discovered and decide what to do next. Natalie arrived with a bottle of wine and the kind of patient expression that indicated she was prepared for a long conversation. We settled on my couch, and I began the story from the beginning: the car accident, the traffic camera footage, my investigation into dashcam technology, and my conversation with Tyler. When I finished, Natalie was quiet for several minutes, swirling wine in her glass as she processed the information. "Cass," she said finally, "how long have you been protecting Brooke from the consequences of her actions?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when was the last time Brooke faced real consequences for hurting someone else? When was the last time she had to clean up her own mess, or make genuine amends for damage she'd caused?" I thought about it, scrolling back through years of incidents where I'd smoothed things over, made excuses, or absorbed the fallout from Brooke's behavior. The answer was uncomfortable. I don't think she ever had. And now she's escalated to committing insurance fraud and endangering people's lives, but she's still expecting someone else to fix the problem and absorb the consequences. Natalie was right. By not holding Brooke accountable for destroying my car, I was enabling a pattern of behavior that was getting progressively more dangerous, but confronting her meant risking our relationship. And despite everything, she was still my sister. "What do you think I should do?" "I think," Natalie said carefully, "that you need to decide whether you're going to keep being Brooke's cleanup crew, or whether you're going to start protecting yourself and other people from her behavior. She's getting married in less than 2 weeks to a man she's been stalking and deceiving." "Cass, what happens after the wedding? What happens when Tyler eventually discovers the truth about what she did? What happens the next time she decides that destroying someone else's property is easier than dealing with her own insecurity?" The questions hung in the air between us, unanswerable but unavoidable. I'd spent my entire adult life believing that family loyalty meant protecting Brooke from consequences, but maybe real loyalty meant protecting her from herself and protecting other people from her. "I need to find that dashcam footage," I said finally. "I need to understand what she discovered about Tyler because that's the key to everything else." Natalie nodded. "And when you find, then I'll decide whether the woman who destroyed my car to cover up her surveillance activities deserves to walk down the aisle to marry the man she was spying on." It was a harsh assessment, but as I spoke the words aloud, I realized they felt true. Brooke had made her choices, and those choices had consequences that extended far beyond my destroyed Honda. She'd betrayed Tyler's trust, endangered innocent people, and committed fraud to cover up her deception. The question wasn't whether she deserved consequences, it was whether I was finally ready to stop protecting her from them. The answer, I was beginning to realize, was yes. The next morning brought an unexpected text from Tyler that changed everything. He'd found the dashcam account. "Meet me at my apartment in an hour. I found something you need to see." Tyler lived in a modern complex near Rainy Street, all glass and steel with views of Lady Bird Lake that probably cost more than my annual salary. I'd never been to his post-divorce home, and walking through the lobby felt like entering a life he'd built specifically to erase any trace of our shared history. The doorman announced my arrival with professional courtesy, and Tyler met me at the elevator with an expression I couldn't read. His apartment was meticulously clean, furnished in the kind of neutral tones that suggested either professional interior design or the careful avoidance of anything too personal. The only photographs visible were landscapes and architectural shots, nothing that revealed relationships or memories that might complicate his carefully curated existence. "I couldn't sleep last night," Tyler said, leading me to his kitchen island where his laptop was open. "I kept thinking about what you said about cloud storage and automatic uploads, so I went through my credit card statements looking for any charges I didn't recognize." He pulled up a banking website and scrolled to a transaction from 6 weeks earlier. "Secure Cam Solution, $49.99 monthly subscription. I called them this morning." My heart started racing. "What did they tell you?" "The account was opened using my credit card information, but with a different email address. Someone used my financial details to set up surveillance equipment with automatic cloud backup." Tyler's voice was tight with controlled anger. "The customer service representative said the account was still active, with ongoing uploads as recently as 3 days ago." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Brooke hadn't just used my car for surveillance, she'd been funding ongoing monitoring using Tyler's own credit card. The level of deception was staggering, but what disturbed me most was the timeline. If uploads had continued until 3 days ago, she'd been recording something even after my car was destroyed. Did they give you access to the account? That's the complicated part. The email address associated with the account isn't one I recognize, and I'd need either the password or verified ownership to access the footage. But, Tyler paused, his expression conflicted. I have a friend who works in cybersecurity. He said there might be ways to recover the data if we can prove unauthorized use of my credit card. It was a gray area legally and ethically, but the idea of accessing Brooke's surveillance footage felt like the only way to understand what we were dealing with. Still, I hesitate. Whatever we found on those recordings would fundamentally change how we saw Brooke, and there would be no going back to the comfortable lies we'd been living with. Tyler, before we do this, I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for what we might find? Because if Brooke has been recording you for weeks or months, there's no telling what kind of private moments might be on there. She considered this seriously. Cass? She destroyed your car and endangered innocent people to hide whatever she recorded. At this point, I think we need to know what was worth risking lives to conceal. We spent the next hour researching digital forensics companies, looking for someone who could help us recover data from the SecureCam account without violating federal computer access laws. The process was more complicated than I'd expected, requiring proof of financial fraud and a formal complaint with local law enforcement. That afternoon, we drove to the Austin Police Department downtown, where a detective named Maria Santos listened to our story with the weary patience of someone who'd heard every possible variation of domestic surveillance cases. Detective Santos was a compact woman with graying temples and intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail as we explained the situation. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, reviewing her notes. "Your sister used your car to conduct surveillance on your ex-husband, who is now her fiancé. She funded this surveillance using his credit card without permission. When she realized the evidence might be problematic, she deliberately crashed your car to destroy the recording equipment." It sounded absurd when summarized so clinically, but Detective Santos didn't seem surprised by the complexity of the case. "This involves several potential crimes," she continued. "Credit card fraud, destruction of property, filing false insurance claims, and possibly stalking depending on what's in those recordings. But accessing the surveillance footage requires a subpoena, which means we need to open a formal investigation." Tyler and I exchanged glances. Opening a police investigation meant that Brooke would inevitably learn about our collaboration, and it would probably destroy any chance of resolving things privately. But it also meant we'd finally have access to the truth. "What would happen to Brooke if you found evidence of these crimes?" I asked. "That would depend on the severity of what we discovered, and whether you chose to press charges. Credit card fraud and insurance fraud are felonies. Destruction of property and stalking are typically misdemeanors unless aggravating factors are involved." The weight of potentially sending my sister to jail settled over me like a heavy blanket. Despite everything she'd done, the idea of her facing criminal charges felt devastating, but the alternative was allowing her behavior to continue escalating until someone got seriously hurt. "We need some time to think about this," Tyler said. Detective Santos nodded. "I understand this is a difficult decision, but I want you to consider something. If your sister is willing to commit insurance fraud and endanger lives to hide surveillance footage, what else might she be willing to do to protect her secret?" We left the police station with business cards and a formal complaint form that we could file if we decided to move forward. The drive back to Tyler's apartment was quiet, both of us processing the magnitude of what we'd learned and the decisions we were facing. That evening, I called Marcus and explained the situation, asking if there were any alternatives to involving law enforcement. He listened carefully, asking technical questions about the surveillance equipment and cloud storage systems. "There might be another approach," he said finally. "If Tyler can prove unauthorized use of his credit card, the bank might be able to provide transaction details that could help identify how the account was set up. It's not the same as accessing the footage, but it might give you more information about what Brooke has been doing." The next morning, Tyler and I met at his bank to file a fraud complaint. The process was surprisingly straightforward. The bank's fraud department was accustomed to dealing with unauthorized charges, and Tyler's case was well documented with credit card statements and the SecureCam customer service records. Within 2 hours, we had a detailed report showing not just the monthly surveillance subscription, but also several other charges that Tyler hadn't noticed. Equipment purchases from spy camera retailers, background check services, and even payments to a private investigation firm called Austin Confidential Inquiries. She hired professionals, Tyler said, staring at the bank statement. This wasn't just amateur surveillance, she was running a comprehensive investigation into my background. I called Austin Confidential Inquiries from the bank parking lot, posing as Brooke and claiming I needed to update payment information for an ongoing investigation. The receptionist was helpful, explaining that their current case involved comprehensive background verification and ongoing monitoring services for a client concerned about her fiancé's fidelity and financial history. When did Rivera request that the surveillance be expanded to include vehicle tracking? I asked, fishing for information. Let me check our notes, the receptionist said. It looks like the vehicle component was added about 3 weeks ago, specifically requesting monitoring of a Honda Civic license plate number. She rattled off my license plate number, confirming that Brooke had given professionals my car's information. I hung up feeling Brooke hadn't just borrowed my car for surveillance, she'd involved it in a professional investigation that I'd never consented to. My vehicle had been used as an unwitting tool in stalking activities that could have legal consequences for me if anyone decided to pursue them. Tyler was quiet as I explained what I'd learned. When I finished, he pulled out his phone and made a call to Austin Confidential Inquiries, this time identifying himself correctly and demanding to speak with whoever was handling his case. The conversation was brief but illuminating. The private investigator, a man named Robert Chen, explained that their investigation had been ongoing for 2 months and had uncovered several areas of concern regarding Tyler's background and current activity. When Tyler demanded specifics, Chen said the full report had been delivered to their client the previous week. What kind of areas of concern? Tyler asked. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details with you, sir. Client confidentiality requires that any questions about our findings be directed through Ms. Rivera. Tyler ended the call and turned to me with an expression that mixed anger with genuine bewilderment. Cass, I have no idea what they could have found. I'm not hiding anything significant. No secret debts, no criminal history, no ongoing relationships that would threaten my engagement. Maybe that's exactly the problem. Maybe Brooke was hoping they'd find something that would justify her suspicions, and when they didn't, she decided to create evidence instead. The idea was disturbing but logical. If Brooke had invested time and money in a professional investigation, expecting to uncover Tyler's dark secrets, learning that he was exactly who he appeared to be, might have been more threatening than discovering actual problems. It would mean her surveillance activities were based on paranoia rather than legitimate concerns, and it would make her the unreasonable party in their relationship. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Brooke. Cass, thank God you called, she said, her voice immediately taking on the breathless quality that indicated incoming drama. I've been going crazy trying to figure out how to replace your car. The insurance company is being impossible, and Tyler's been acting so weird lately that I can barely think straight. Brooke, we need to talk, in person, today. Something in my tone must have alerted her, because her voice immediately became cautious. Is everything okay? You sound strange. Meet me at Zilker Park in an hour, by the volleyball courts. Cass, you're scaring me. What's going on? 1 hour, Brooke. Come alone. I chose Zilker Park because it was public but spacious, with enough open area that we could speak privately without being overheard. I arrived early and found a picnic table near the volleyball courts, positioning myself so I could see her approaching from any direction. The afternoon was hot and humid, typical for Austin in late spring, and the park was busy with joggers, dog walkers, and families enjoying the weekend weather. Brooke arrived wearing oversized sunglasses and a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked around nervously before spotting me, and her walk across the grass had the careful precision of someone trying to appear casual while fighting internal panic. "Okay, you're really freaking me out," she said, sitting down across from me. "What's so important that we had to meet in a park like we're planning some kind of conspiracy?" I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us, the screen showing the traffic camera footage that proved her accident had been intentional. Brooke's face went completely white as she recognized the intersection and the timestamp. "I know you crashed my car on purpose," I said quietly. "I know you were using it for surveillance on Tyler. I know you hired a private investigator and set up surveillance equipment using his credit card, and I know you destroyed my car because you realized the footage you'd recorded was more incriminating to you than it was to him." Brooke stared at the phone screen, her mouth slightly open as she processed the fact that her carefully constructed deception had been completely unraveled. When she finally looked up, her expression had shifted from shock to something that looked almost like relief. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About a week. Tyler and I have been working together to understand what really happened." "Tyler knows." Her voice cracked slightly on his name. "He knows about the surveillance, the credit card fraud, and the private investigator. What he doesn't know yet is what you discovered that made you willing to destroy my car to hide it." Brooke was quiet for a long time, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress as she struggled with how much to reveal. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I found out about his first marriage." The admission hung in the air between us like a confession. I'd suspected this might be part of what she'd discovered, but hearing her say it out loud still felt like a punch to the stomach. "You knew Tyler was married before, and you knew he was married to me." Brooke nodded miserably. "The private investigator found the divorce records about 6 weeks ago. When I saw your name on the documents, I thought there had to be some mistake. But then I started paying attention to how you two acted around each other at family dinners, and I realized you'd both been lying to me." "We weren't lying, Brooke. We were protecting you from unnecessary drama." "Unnecessary." Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby park visitors. "My fiancé was married to my sister, and you both decided that was unnecessary information. You met Tyler completely by chance. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, our marriage was over long before you entered the picture. We didn't tell you because we knew it would complicate things for no good reason." "No good reason?" Brooke's composure was starting to crack. "Cass, do you have any idea how humiliating it is to discover that your perfect relationship is built on lies? Do you know what it feels like to realize that everyone around you has been keeping secrets about the most important decision of your life?" For the first time since discovering her deception, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my sister. Learning about Tyler's previous marriage from a private investigator rather than from the people she trusted must have been devastating. But sympathy didn't excuse the choices she'd made in response to that discovery. "Brooke, I understand why you were upset, but that doesn't justify using my car to stalk Tyler, committing credit card fraud, or destroying my property to cover up your surveillance activity." "I wasn't stalking him," she said defensively. "I was trying to understand what else he might be hiding from me. If he could lie about being married before, what else was he capable of lying about? And what did you discover?" Brooke's expression shifted again, this time to something that looked almost like embarrassment. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Tyler is exactly who he appears to be: boring, predictable, and completely faithful. The most scandalous thing in his life is that he sometimes works late and forgets to text me back promptly." The revelation was somehow more damning than if she'd discovered actual infidelity. Brooke had destroyed my car, committed multiple crimes, and endangered innocent people because she couldn't handle the discovery that her fiancé was a decent man who had simply made the mistake of marrying her sister first. "So you destroyed the surveillance footage because it proved Tyler was innocent, not because it proved he was guilty." "I destroyed it because I realized how insane I'd become," Brooke said, tears starting to form behind her sunglasses. "When I watched myself following him around town with cameras and recording equipment, I saw someone I didn't recognize, someone paranoid and controlling and desperate. I couldn't let Tyler see that footage because it would prove that I don't trust him, and I couldn't let you see it because it would prove that I'd violated your privacy and destroyed your property for no good reason." And the private investigators confirmed that Tyler is a boring, honest man with no secrets worth hiding. No criminal history, no financial problems, no ongoing relationships with other women. The most interesting thing they found was that he'd been married before, which I already knew by then. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the full scope of what had happened. Brooke had constructed an elaborate deception to hide evidence of her own paranoia and jealousy, and in doing so, she'd revealed character flaws that were far more damaging than anything she might have discovered about Tyler. Brooke, what you did to my car wasn't just property damage. You could have killed someone, you committed insurance fraud, you used Tyler's credit card without permission. These are serious crimes that could result in jail time. Are you going to report me? It was the question I'd been dreading, because I honestly didn't know the answer. The practical part of my mind knew that Brooke needed to face consequences for her actions, but the sister part of my heart recoiled from the idea of sending her to prison. I don't know yet, but Brooke, I need you to understand something. This behavior can't continue. You can't solve relationship problems by conducting surveillance on your partner. You can't destroy other people's property to hide your own mistakes, and you can't commit crimes and expect other people to cover for you. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I don't know how to fix any of this. You start by telling Tyler the truth, all of it, the surveillance, the private investigator, the reasons you hired them, and what you discover. You let him decide whether he wants to marry someone who's been investigating him for months instead of simply talking to him about her concerns. Brooke's face crumpled. He'll leave me. But if he does, it'll be because you've shown him who you really are when you're scared and insecure, and maybe that's information he deserves to have before he commits to spending his life with you. The conversation continued for another hour, with Brooke alternating between defensive justifications and tearful apologies. By the time we parted ways, I wasn't sure whether she truly understood the severity of what she'd done or whether she was simply sorry she'd been caught. That evening, I called Tyler and summarized my conversation with Brooke. He listened without interruption, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. She hired a private investigator because she found out I was married to you. That's what triggered it. Yeah, but Tyler, the investigation confirmed that you're exactly who you appear to be. She destroyed my car to hide evidence of her own paranoia, not to hide evidence of your wrongdoing. Jesus, Cass, what kind of person does something like that? It was a question I'd been asking myself for days, and I still didn't have a good answer. The Brooke who had destroyed my car to hide surveillance footage was someone I didn't recognize, despite having lived with her manipulative tendencies my entire life. I think, I said slowly, that she's someone who's never learned to handle situations where she's not in complete control, and I think our family spent so many years protecting her from consequences, that she never developed healthy ways to deal with conflict or uncertainty. What are you going to do about the car? About the insurance fraud? I haven't decided yet. But Tyler, what are you going to do about the wedding? Another long silence. When Tyler finally spoke, his voice was steady but sad. I'm going to ask her to postpone. I need time to process what I've learned, and she needs time to figure out who she wants to be in this relationship, because the person who's been investigating me for months isn't someone I can marry, and if she refuses to postpone, then I guess I'll have to decide whether I'm willing to marry someone who thinks surveillance is an appropriate way to handle relationship concerns. We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters, how he planned to approach the conversation with Brooke, whether he wanted me present as a witness, and what would happen to the wedding preparations if they decided to postpone or cancel. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the strange twists that had led me to this moment. 3 weeks ago, I'd been living a quiet life, focused on work and slowly rebuilding my social connections after my divorce. Now I was actively investigating my sister's crimes and collaborating with my ex-husband to determine whether his engagement should continue. The situation was surreal, but it had also been oddly healing. Working with Tyler to uncover the truth about Brooke's surveillance had given us opportunities to talk honestly about our marriage and divorce for the first time. We'd been able to discuss the mistakes we'd both made, and the misunderstandings that had driven us apart. It hadn't erased the pain of our failed relationship, but it had provided closure that I hadn't realized I needed. More importantly, investigating Brooke's deception had forced me to confront my own role in enabling her behavior. I'd spent years making excuses for her selfishness and cleaning up the messes she created, telling myself that this was what loyal sisters did for each other, but loyalty that protected someone from consequences also protected them from growth, and it ultimately did more harm than good. The next morning brought a text from Brooke asking if we could meet again. She wanted to discuss how to make things right before she talked to Tyler. I agreed to meet her for coffee, though I was skeptical about her motivation. She arrived at the coffee shop with paperwork, insurance forms, estimates for replacing my car, and a cashier's check for $5,000 that she claimed was a down payment on making amends. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she began, "and I want to make this right before I talk to Tyler. I want to show you that I understand how badly I messed up." I looked at the check, recognizing it as another attempt to solve problems with money rather than accountability. The amount was more than enough to cover my insurance deductible and rental car costs, but it didn't address the underlying issues of trust and responsibility. "Brooke, replacing my car doesn't undo the surveillance activities, or the credit card fraud, and it doesn't prove that you understand why what you did was wrong." "I know that," she said quickly, "but it's a start, right? It shows that I'm taking responsibility for the damage I caused." Taking responsibility would mean accepting consequences, not just writing checks to make problems disappear. Brooke's expression shifted to frustration. "Cass, what more do you want from me? I'm admitting I was wrong. I'm paying for the damage. I'm going to tell Tyler the truth. What else can I do? You can stop treating this like a problem that money can solve and start treating it like a pattern of behavior that needs to change." Our conversation continued in circles, with Brooke offering increasingly elaborate forms of financial compensation, while I tried to explain that the real issue wasn't monetary. She genuinely seemed to believe that if she could just find the right amount to pay or the right gesture to make, she could return our relationship to its previous state of comfortable dysfunction. By the time I left the coffee shop, I realized that Brooke wasn't going to change unless she faced real consequences for her actions. Money couldn't buy accountability, and good intentions couldn't erase the fact that she'd been willing to risk innocent lives to hide her own paranoia. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Detective Santos, informing her that I was ready to file a formal complaint about the credit card fraud and insurance fraud. The second was to the wedding venue, asking about their cancellation policies and refund procedures. It was time for Brooke to face the consequences of her choices, even if it meant destroying the fairy tale wedding she'd spent months planning. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way, and some secrets were too damaging to remain hidden. The truth was finally going to surface, and this time I wasn't going to be the one cleaning up the mess it left behind. The Driscoll Hotel buzzed with wedding preparation energy on the Thursday morning before Brooke's Saturday ceremony. I stood in the ornate lobby, watching vendors wheel in elaborate floral arrangements while the wedding planner directed traffic with military precision. Everything looked perfect, exactly the kind of fairy tale event that Brooke had dreamed about since we were children playing dress-up in our grandmother's attic. What the bustling staff didn't know was that I carried a manila envelope containing police reports, bank statements, and surveillance footage that could destroy everything they were working so hard to create. Detective Santos had moved quickly once I filed the formal complaint, and the evidence against Brooke was now part of an active criminal investigation. Tyler had asked to meet me here before his scheduled conversation with Brooke. He'd spent the previous night reviewing everything we'd uncovered, and he'd made decisions that would reshape both their futures. When I spotted him near the hotel bar, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "I keep thinking there must be some explanation I'm missing," he said as we found a quiet corner away from the wedding chaos. "Some reason that would make all of this make sense." "Tyler, sometimes people do terrible things for surprisingly ordinary reasons. Brooke destroyed my car because she was embarrassed about her own paranoia, not because she discovered anything worth hiding. But the level of deception, the private investigators, the surveillance equipment, the staged accident. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment. This was months of calculated dishonesty." He was right, and we both knew it. The evidence painted a picture of someone capable of elaborate schemes and comfortable with manipulating everyone around her to protect her own interests. It wasn't the kind of behavior that could be explained away as wedding stress or temporary insecurity. "Have you decided what you're going to tell her?" Tyler pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. I wrote it down so I wouldn't lose my nerve. "I'm going to ask her to explain everything. The surveillance, the private investigator, the credit card fraud, the accident. Do I want to hear her version before I make any final decisions? And if her explanation doesn't satisfy you, then I'm calling off the wedding. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications that extended far beyond their relationship. Canceling a wedding 48 hours before the ceremony would devastate Brooke, embarrass both families, and cost thousands of dollars in non-refundable deposits. But marrying someone who had been conducting covert surveillance for months would be even more devastating in the long run. Tyler, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I think you're handling this with more grace than she deserves. A lot of people would have walked away the moment they discovered the surveillance. Maybe they would have been smarter than me, he said with a sad smile. But I loved her, Kat. I really thought we were building something honest together. The past tense of his statement was telling. Whatever Tyler had felt for Brooke, the discoveries of the past week had fundamentally altered his perception of their relationship. Trust, once broken on this scale, was nearly impossible to rebuild. We were interrupted by Stephanie Walsh, Brooke's wedding planner, who approached with the kind of controlled panic that indicated a crisis in progress. "Excuse me, but are you Tyler Harrison?" she asked. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. We have some last-minute issues with the catering timeline, and the bride is, well, she's having some kind of breakdown in the bridal suite." Tyler and I exchanged glances. Brooke's breakdown was probably related to the stress of knowing that her deception was about to be exposed, but Stephanie didn't need to know the details. "I'll handle it," Tyler said. "Can you give us some privacy in the Wellington suite for about an hour?" Stephanie nodded gratefully and hurried away to manage whatever other crises were unfolding in the wedding preparation chaos. Tyler and I took the elevator to the third floor, where the bridal suite had been reserved for wedding day preparation. The hallway was lined with garment bags and flower boxes, evidence of the elaborate ceremony that might never happen. Tyler knocked on the suite door, and we heard Brooke's muffled voice asking who it was. When he identified himself, there was a long pause before she opened the door. Brooke looked terrible. Her usually perfect makeup was smeared, her hair was disheveled, and she was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt instead of the designer outfits she typically favored. The transformation was so dramatic that for a moment I wondered if she was genuinely ill. "Tyler, thank God you're here," she said, throwing her arms around him with desperate intensity. "I've been going crazy waiting for you to call me back. I need to tell you something important before the wedding. That's why I'm here," Tyler said gently, extracting himself from her embrace. "But Cass is going to stay while we talk. What I need to discuss involves her too." Brooke's expression shifted when she noticed me standing behind Tyler. Her eyes darted between us, and I could see her mind working to understand why we were together. "Cass, what are you doing here? This is supposed to be a private conversation between Tyler and me." "Brooke, I think you know why I'm here," I said, stepping into the suite and closing the door behind us. "We need to talk about what really happened to my car." The color drained from Brooke's face. She looked at Tyler with something approaching desperation, as if hoping he might protect her from the conversation that was about to unfold. "Tyler, I can explain everything. I know how this must look, but there are things you don't understand about the situation." "Then explain them," Tyler said, his voice carefully neutral. "Start with why you hired a private investigator to investigate my background without telling me." Brooke sank onto the suite's velvet sofa, her hands twisting in her lap as she struggled with how much to reveal. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I found out about your marriage to Cass about 2 months ago. When I realized you'd both been lying to me about your history, I started wondering what else you might be hiding. So you decided to have me investigated by professionals rather than simply asking me directly." "I was scared," Brooke said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I was scared that if I confronted you, you'd just lie to me again. I needed to know the truth before I married you." Tyler sat down across from her, his expression a mixture of sadness and disbelief. "Brooke, Do you understand how completely that violated my privacy and trust? Do you realize that conducting surveillance on your fiancé is not normal behavior? I know it looks bad, but Tyler, I was about to commit my entire life to you. Don't I have a right to know who I'm marrying? You have a right to honesty and transparency, which you could have gotten by having an adult conversation with me. You don't have a right to hire investigators and install surveillance equipment without my knowledge or consent. I pulled out my phone and showed Brooke the traffic camera footage that proved her accident had been intentional. And you definitely don't have the right to destroy other people's property to cover up your surveillance activities. Brooke stared at the footage, watching herself deliberately steer my car into the path of the delivery truck. When the video ended, she looked up at us with an expression that had shifted from remorse to something approaching defiance. You don't understand the pressure I was under. You don't know what it's like to discover that everyone you trust has been lying to you. We weren't lying to you, Tyler said, firmly. We were protecting you from unnecessary complications. Our marriage ended 2 years before you and I met. It had nothing to do with our relationship. It had everything to do with our relationship. Brooke's voice rose, taking on the sharp edge that indicated her carefully controlled facade was cracking. How am I supposed to trust you when you could hide something that's significant? How am I supposed to believe that our entire relationship isn't built on deception? By talking to me about your concerns instead of hiring private investigators, Tyler said. By asking questions instead of installing hidden cameras. By trusting the person you claim to love instead of treating him like a criminal suspect. I did trust you, and look where it got me. You lied about being married before. You lied about knowing my sister. How many other lies have you told that I haven't discovered yet? The circular logic of her argument was staggering. Brooke had responded to learning about Tyler's previous marriage by conducting months of covert surveillance, and now she was using the results of that surveillance to justify the surveillance itself. It was the kind of reasoning that made productive conversation impossible. Brooke, I said, Tyler's background investigation confirmed that he's exactly who he appears to be. You didn't find evidence of ongoing deception. You found evidence that he's been completely honest with you about everything, except his previous marriage, which ended before he met you. Then why did he hide it? Tyler answered before I could respond. Because I knew you'd react exactly the way you're reacting now. I knew you'd turn it into drama and make it about yourself instead of accepting that people have histories that predate their current relationship. So you decided I couldn't handle the truth. I decided that our relationship was strong enough to exist without constantly referencing my failed marriage. I was wrong to hide it from you, but I wasn't wrong about how you'd respond to learning about it. Brooke was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of Tyler's words. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its defensive edge and taken on a tone of genuine confusion. Tyler, I don't know how to be in a relationship where I don't know everything about the other person. I don't know how to trust someone who's capable of keeping secrets from me. And I don't know how to be in a relationship with someone who thinks surveillance is an appropriate response to uncertainty. Tyler replied. Brooke, healthy relationships require some level of privacy and individual autonomy. Partners don't investigate each other, they communicate with each other. But what if communication isn't enough? What if the other person is lying? Then you decide whether you can live with uncertainty, or you end the relationship. You don't hire private investigators and install hidden cameras. The conversation continued for another hour, with Brooke alternating between tearful apologies and defensive justifications for her behavior. She seemed genuinely unable to understand why her surveillance activities were problematic, repeatedly returning to the argument that she'd had a right to know everything about Tyler's background before marrying him. Finally, Tyler stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Austin. When he turned back to face Brooke, his expression was resolved. Brooke, I can't marry you. The words hit her like a physical blow. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if she'd been struck. Tyler, please, I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't call off our wedding. It's not about punishment or making you suffer, Tyler said gently. It's about compatibility. You need a partner who's willing to share every detail of their life, and I need a partner who trusts me enough not to investigate me. Those are fundamentally incompatible needs. But I love you too, but love isn't enough when the basic assumptions about trust and privacy are this different. Brooke looked at me with an expression that mixed desperation with accusation. Cass, you did this. You turned him against me. I didn't turn him against you, Brooke. I showed him evidence of what you did to my car and helped him understand the extent of your surveillance activities. Tyler made his own decisions based on information he had a right to know. You're my sister. You're supposed to support me, not sabotage my relationship. Supporting you means holding you accountable when you hurt people, not enabling behavior that's destructive to everyone around you. Tyler moved toward the door. Brooke, I'm going to start making calls to cancel the wedding vendor. I'll handle the financial aspects, deposits, cancellation fees, whatever costs are involved. You don't need to worry about the logistics. Tyler, wait, can't we at least postpone instead of canceling? Give ourselves time to work through this. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. Brooke, postponing would just delay the inevitable. The issues between us aren't the kind that time alone can resolve. What if I prove to you that I can change? What if I show you that I can be the kind of partner you need? How would you do that? Brooke was quiet for a long time, struggling to come up with an answer that would salvage her relationship. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and defeated. I don't know. Tyler nodded sadly. That's the problem. You can't fix behavior you don't understand is wrong. After Tyler left to begin the process of canceling their wedding, Brooke and I sat in the suite, surrounded by the detritus of her abandoned fairy tale. Wedding dress hanging in its protective bag, shoes arranged neatly by the window, jewelry boxes containing the accessories she'd spent months selecting. Everything ready for a ceremony that would never happen. Cass, what am I going to tell everyone? What am I going to say to Mom and Dad and all the guests who are flying in for tomorrow night's rehearsal dinner? It was typical of Brooke to focus on the public embarrassment, rather than the deeper issues that had destroyed her relationship. She was more concerned about explaining the cancellation to others than understanding why it had been necessary. You tell them the truth. You explain that you and Tyler discovered fundamental incompatibilities that made marriage inadvisable. I can't tell them I hired private investigators to spy on my fiancé. I can't tell them I destroyed your car to hide surveillance footage. Then you tell them that you realized you weren't ready for marriage and needed more time to work on personal growth. Brooke considered this, probably calculating how to frame the narrative in a way that minimized her responsibility while maximizing sympathy from others. Will you help me with the explanations? Will you back up whatever story I decide to tell? It was another attempt to make me complicit in managing the consequences of her actions. For my entire adult life, I'd been helping Brooke craft explanations that protected her reputation while avoiding accountability. This time I chose differently. No, Brooke, you created this situation and you need to handle the explanations yourself. I'm not going to help you lie to our family about what really happened. So you're just going to abandon me when I need you most. I'm going to stop enabling behavior that's destructive to everyone around you, including yourself. There's a difference. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Brooke oscillating between anger, self-pity, and desperate attempts to negotiate some form of support from me. Eventually she seemed to understand that I wasn't going to be her accomplice in managing the fallout from her choices. That evening I received multiple phone calls from family members who had learned about the wedding cancellation. My parents were devastated and confused, demanding explanations that I wasn't prepared to provide. Aunts, uncles and cousins who had made travel arrangements called to confirm whether the ceremony was really canceled and to understand what had happened. I referred everyone to Brooke for details, explaining only that she and Tyler had decided they weren't compatible and needed to end their engagement. It was a truthful response that avoided the specifics of surveillance and fraud while still acknowledging the reality of what had occurred. The most difficult call came from Tyler's mother, who had flown in from Boston for the wedding and was staying at a hotel downtown. She asked if I could meet her for coffee to help her understand what had happened to her son's relationship. Margaret Harrison was an elegant woman in her 60s with the kind of understated sophistication that spoke of old money and careful breeding. She listened to my carefully edited explanation with the composure of someone accustomed to managing family crises with discretion. "Tyler mentioned that you were his first wife," she said when I finished. "I hope you don't mind me saying that I find it strange you've become so involved in his current relationship problems." It was a fair observation and one that I'd been asking myself throughout the past week. My involvement in Tyler's relationship with Brooke had been complicated by our shared history, but it had also been driven by the fact that my sister had used my property to conduct surveillance activities. "Miss Harrison, I became involved because Brooke used my car for surveillance purposes and then destroyed it to hide the evidence. My interest wasn't in Tyler's relationship. It was in understanding why my sister felt justified in destroying my property. And what did you discover? That she's not ready for marriage to anyone, and that Tyler deserves a partner who trusts him enough not to investigate him." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Tyler has always been too trusting, too willing to see the best in people even when evidence suggests otherwise. I'm glad he found the strength to end things before making a more permanent mistake." We talked for another hour about Tyler's tendency to ignore red flags in relationships and his pattern of trying to fix people who didn't want to be fixed. Margaret's insights helped me understand why Tyler had been drawn to Brooke despite her obvious personality flaws and why he'd been willing to overlook concerning behavior for so long. The next morning, the day that should have been Brooke's wedding day, I woke up to a series of frantic text messages from my sister. She was at the hotel surrounded by wedding vendors who were demanding explanations for the cancellation. Florists, photographers, caterers, and musicians all needed to understand why their services were no longer required. I drove to the Driscoll Hotel and found Brooke in the ballroom that had been decorated for her reception. The space was beautiful, elegant centerpieces, romantic lighting, a dance floor surrounded by tables set with fine china and crystal. It looked like the setting for a fairy tale, except the fairy tale had ended before it began. Brooke sat at what would have been the head table, still wearing pajamas and surrounded by vendor contracts and cancellation paperwork. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red from crying. "I can't do this, Cass. I can't face all these people and explain why everything fell apart. I can't handle the questions and the judgment and the pity." "Then don't," I said, sitting down beside her. "Let the wedding planner handle the vendor communications. You focus on taking care of yourself." How am I supposed to take care of myself when my entire life just collapsed? It was a genuine question, and for the first time since this crisis began, Brooke seemed ready to consider the possibility that she needed to make fundamental changes rather than simply managing the immediate consequences of her action. "You start by acknowledging that your behavior toward Tyler was wrong, not just ineffective. You accept that surveillance and deception aren't acceptable ways to handle relationship concern, and you figure out why you felt entitled to violate his privacy instead of simply talking to him about your concerns." Brooke was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "I don't know how to be in a relationship where I don't control everything. I don't know how to trust someone when I can't verify everything they tell me." "Then maybe you're not ready for marriage yet. Maybe you need to work on yourself before you try to build a life with someone else." "But I'm 32, Cass. All my friends are married. I don't want to start over." Starting over is better than building a marriage on surveillance and suspicion. We spent the morning working through the logistics of canceling a wedding 48 hours before the ceremony. It was an expensive and complicated process, but Tyler had been true to his word about handling the financial aspects. He absorbed the costs of vendor cancellations, venue fees, and guest accommodations without complaint. By noon, the ballroom had been stripped of its decorations and returned to its neutral state. The fairy tale was officially over, leaving only the real-world consequences of poor choices and broken trust. That afternoon, Detective Santos called to inform me that the district attorney's office had reviewed the evidence against Brooke and decided to proceed with formal charges. Credit card fraud, insurance fraud, and destruction of property were serious offenses that carried potential jail time. Brooke would be arrested within the week, and her problems were just beginning. The wedding that never happened had become a criminal case that would follow her for years to come, and for the first time in her life, there would be no family members willing to clean up the mess she'd created. Justice, it seemed, was finally catching up with someone who had spent her entire life believing that charm and manipulation could solve any problem. The reckoning had been a long time coming, but it was finally here. 6 months later, I stood in the parking lot of my new apartment complex, running my hands along the smooth surface of my replacement Honda Civic. This one was silver instead of blue, with newer technology and better safety features, but it felt like more than just a car. It felt like a symbol of the life I'd rebuilt after everything fell apart. The criminal case against Brooke had concluded 3 weeks earlier with a plea bargain that included restitution, community service and probation. She'd avoided jail time but barely, and only because Tyler had spoken to the prosecutor about her lack of prior criminal history. Even in the aftermath of her betrayal, he'd shown her more compassion than she'd shown anyone else throughout the entire ordeal. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie asking if I was ready for our lunch date. We'd been meeting regularly since the wedding disaster, and these conversations had become an essential part of my healing process. Natalie had the unique ability to help me process complex emotions without judgment, and she'd been instrumental in helping me understand the patterns of dysfunction that had shaped my relationship with Brooke. The restaurant Natalie had chosen was a small Italian place on South Lamar, the kind of neighborhood spot where the servers knew regular customers by name, and the atmosphere was casual enough for honest conversation. I arrived early and claimed a table near the window, watching Austin traffic navigate the perpetual construction that seemed to define the city. Natalie arrived with her usual energy, sliding into the booth across from me with the kind of smile that indicated she had news to share. "Okay. I have to tell you something, but you have to promise not to react dramatically," she said, pulling out her phone and scrolling to what appeared to be a social media post. "That's not a promising way to start a conversation," I replied, though I was smiling despite my apprehension. "Brooke's back on Instagram." She turned her phone toward me, displaying a carefully curated post that showed my sister sitting in what appeared to be a therapist's office, looking contemplative and slightly vulnerable. The caption read, "6 months of hard work on myself. Learning to love authentically instead of controlling fearfully. Grateful for the journey, even when it's painful." I stared at the post, trying to process the complex emotions it triggered. There was relief that Brooke seemed to be getting professional help, skepticism about whether the change was genuine, and a strange sadness about the distance that had grown between us. "Has she tried to contact you at all?" Natalie asked, not direct. "She sent a card to my office last month apologizing for everything, and asking if we could talk when I was ready. I haven't responded yet." "Are you planning to?" It was a question I'd been avoiding for months. Part of me missed the sister relationship we'd had before I understood the full extent of her manipulation, but I wasn't sure if reconciliation was possible, or even advisable. Trust, once broken as completely as Brooke had broken it, was extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I want to believe she's changed, but I've seen her reinvent herself before when it served her purposes. I'm not sure I can tell the difference between genuine growth and strategic repositioning." Natalie nodded understandingly. "What would it take for you to be willing to give her another chance? Time, consistency, evidence that she's actually learned from her mistakes rather than just learning to better manage the consequences. And what would that evidence look like?" I considered the question carefully. What would genuine change look like in someone who had spent her entire life manipulating others to avoid accountability? She'd have to demonstrate that she understands why her behavior was wrong, not just that it was ineffective. She'd have to show that she's developed healthy ways to handle uncertainty and conflict, and she'd have to prove that she can maintain relationships without trying to control every aspect of them. Those are pretty high standards. They're the minimum standards for someone who destroyed my car to hide surveillance footage of her own fiancé. We ordered lunch and spent the next hour talking about my job, Natalie's relationship with Marcus, and the various ways that life had improved since I'd stopped managing the fallout from Brooke's chaos. It was remarkable how much mental energy had been freed up when I'd stopped anticipating and preparing for her next crisis. As we prepared to leave, Natalie asked the question I'd been expecting throughout our entire meal. Have you talked to Tyler lately? Tyler and I had maintained sporadic contact since the wedding cancellation. Mostly brief text exchanges about practical matters related to the criminal case. Our interactions were friendly but careful, both of us navigating the strange territory of shared history complicated by recent collaboration. He texted last week to let me know the restitution check had cleared. We're officially even on all the financial aspects, and unofficially. I smiled at Natalie's persistence. She'd been subtly advocating for Tyler and me to have a more substantial conversation about our relationship, past and present, but I'd been reluctant to complicate my life further. Unofficially, I think we both need more time to process everything that happened before we figure out what kind of relationship, if any, we want to have going forward. But you're open to the possibility? I'm open to a lot of possibilities I wasn't open to 6 months ago. That evening, I drove my new Honda to a park near downtown where I'd started taking regular walks as part of my effort to establish healthier routine. The exercise was beneficial, but more importantly, the quiet time helped me think through complex emotions without the distractions of work and daily responsibilities. As I completed my second lap around the pond, I spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the walking path. Tyler was reading a book, seemingly absorbed in whatever story had captured his attention. He looked up as I approached, and his face broke into the kind of genuine smile that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him years earlier. Cass. Hey, I didn't expect to see you here. I walk here most evenings. It helps me think. Mind if I join you for a lap? I finished my book and could use the exercise. We fell into step together, our pace naturally synchronizing as we navigated the familiar path. For several minutes, we walked in comfortable silence, both of us apparently content to simply enjoy each other's company, without the pressure of meaningful conversation. Tyler, can I ask you something? I said finally. Of course. Do you ever regret the way our marriage ended? Not the fact that it ended, but the way we handled it. Tyler considered the question seriously, his expression thoughtful as he worked through emotions that were clearly still complicated. I regret that we never learned to communicate honestly about difficult things. I regret that I let my shame about the Rachel situation prevent me from being transparent with you. And I regret that we both gave up on our relationship instead of fighting for it. Do you think fighting for it would have made a difference? I think it would have given us a chance to understand what went wrong instead of just accepting that it was broken. Even if we'd still ended up divorced, we might have maintained respect for each other instead of spending 2 years avoiding any meaningful contact. His words resonated with my own reflections about our relationship. We'd both been young and inexperienced with serious conflict resolution, and we'd chosen the path of least resistance rather than the path that might have led to growth. Tyler, I need to tell you something that I should have said 2 years ago. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. I'm sorry I didn't give you a chance to explain about Rachel. I'm sorry I made assumptions about your character based on incomplete information. And I'm sorry I let pride prevent me from having the honest conversation that might have saved our marriage. Tyler was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Cass, you don't owe me an apology for protecting yourself from what appeared to be infidelity. I created the situation that led to your assumptions, and I compounded it by not being honest with you from the beginning. But I could have given you a chance to explain instead of just filing for divorce and disappearing. And I could have fought harder to make you listen instead of just accepting your decision and moving on. We resumed walking, both of us apparently relieved to have finally acknowledged the mistakes we'd both made in handling our divorce. It didn't erase the pain of our failed marriage, but it provided a foundation for whatever relationship we might build going forward. Tyler, what you did for Brooke during the plea bargaining process, speaking to the prosecutor advocating for leniency, that was incredibly generous considering what she put you through. She needed help and I was in a position to provide it. Holding grudges doesn't serve anyone. Most people wouldn't have been so forgiving. Tyler shrugged. Most people haven't had the experience of making serious mistakes and needing forgiveness themselves. It was a reference to his handling of the Rachel situation, but also a broader acknowledgement of the grace required for people to move forward after hurting each other. Tyler had learned from his own experience how destructive shame and unforgiveness could be, and he'd chosen to break that cycle even when dealing with someone who had betrayed him as completely as Brooke had. "Can I ask you something now?" Tyler said. I nodded. "Are you happy with the life you've built since our divorce?" It was a simple question with a complex answer. My post-divorce life had been quieter, more independent, and less emotionally complicated than my married life had been. I'd developed stronger friendships, pursued interests that Tyler hadn't shared, and learned to make decisions based solely on my own preferences and priorities. "I'm happy with who I've become," I said carefully. "I'm not sure I'm happy with some of the things I've lost along the way." "What kinds of things?" "The sense of partnership, having someone to share daily experiences with, the comfort of knowing that someone cares about the details of my life." Tyler nodded. "I miss those things too." I thought Brooke and I had that kind of partnership, but I realize now that what we had was performance, not genuine intimacy. What's the difference? Performance is showing someone the version of yourself that you think they want to see. Intimacy is showing someone who you actually are and trusting them to love you anyway. It was an insightful distinction, and one that helped me understand why Tyler's relationship with Brooke had felt hollow despite appearing perfect from the outside. Brooke had been performing the role of ideal fiancé while conducting covert surveillance, creating a relationship built on deception rather than genuine connection. "Tyler, what do you want now, for your life?" I want to build something real with someone who doesn't need to investigate me to feel secure in our relationship. I want partnership based on trust rather than control, and if that person happened to be someone from your past." Tyler stopped walking again, and looked at me with an expression that was both hopeful and cautious. "Are you asking hypothetically? Or are you asking about us specifically?" It was a fair question, and one that required an honest answer. I'd been thinking about Tyler more frequently since we'd worked together to uncover Brooke's deception, and I'd been surprised by how natural our collaboration had felt. But I'd also been cautious about romanticizing our connection, or ignoring the issues that had ended our marriage. "I'm asking about us specifically. But Tyler, I need you to understand that I'm not the same person you married 6 years ago. I've changed in ways that might make me incompatible with who you are now." "How have you changed?" "I'm more independent. I'm less willing to compromise my own needs to maintain peace in a relationship. I'm more direct about expressing concerns, instead of hoping problems will resolve themselves." Tyler smiled. "Those all sound like positive changes." "They are, but they might also make me more difficult to be in a relationship with." "Cass, I don't want easy, I want real, and I think we have a better chance of building something real now than we did when we were younger and less experienced." We completed our walk around the pond as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water and creating the kind of romantic atmosphere that would have seemed too perfect if we'd planned it. But the conversation felt natural rather than forced, and the possibility of rebuilding our relationship felt genuine rather than nostalgic. "Tyler, if we're going to explore this, we need to do it differently than we did before. No secrets, no assumptions, no avoiding difficult conversation." "Agreed. Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, and we need to take it slowly. I don't want to rush into something just because we have history together." I wouldn't want to rush either. We've both learned too much about ourselves to waste it by repeating old patterns. As we reached our cars, Tyler turned to me with an expression that was both serious and hopeful. "Cass, would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Not as part of investigating your sister or managing a crisis, just as two people who are interested in getting to know each other again." I considered the invitation, weighing the potential for genuine connection against the risk of reopening emotional wounds that had taken years to heal. But looking at Tyler's face, I realized that the person standing in front of me was someone I wanted to know better, regardless of our shared history. "I'd like that," I said. "But Tyler, I want to be clear about something. If we do this, we're not trying to recreate what we had before. We're trying to build something new, something better," he agreed. 3 months later, Tyler and I were sitting in my new apartment, assembling furniture and debating the merits of various Netflix shows like the domestic partners we were slowly becoming again. Our relationship was different this time, more intentional, more communicative, and built on a foundation of genuine compatibility rather than romantic idealism. We'd taken things slowly, spending months having honest conversations about our expectations, our fears and our individual growth before making any commitments about our future together. The process had been sometimes difficult but ultimately rewarding, as we'd learned to navigate conflict and uncertainty with trust rather than suspicion. My phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something prompted me to answer. "Cass, it's me." Brooke's voice was quiet and tentative, lacking the dramatic flair that had characterized most of our previous conversations. "Hi Brooke. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I know you asked for space, and I've been trying to respect that, but I wanted to talk to you about something important." Tyler looked up from the bookshelf he was assembling, his expression questioning. I nodded to indicate that I was okay with taking the call. "What did you want to talk about?" I wanted to apologize, really apologize, not just say the words I think you want to hear. I've been working with a therapist for 8 months now, and I'm starting to understand how my behavior affected you, and Tyler and everyone else around me. I was quiet, waiting to see if this apology would be different from the previous attempts at manipulation, disguised as remorse. "Cass, I stole your car and destroyed it to hide evidence of my own paranoia and jealousy. I violated Tyler's privacy and trust in ways that were inexcusable. I put innocent people at risk to protect my own reputation, and I expected you to help me avoid consequences, because I'd convinced myself that family loyalty meant enabling destructive behavior." The apology was more specific and self-aware than anything Brooke had said previously, and it acknowledged responsibility rather than seeking sympathy or understanding. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong, and I'm working every day to become someone who would never make those choices again." "Brooke, what does that work look like?" "Therapy, twice a week. Group counseling for people with control issues. Volunteer work at a domestic violence shelter, where I'm learning about healthy relationship dynamics, and honest examination of every choice I make to understand my motivation." It sounded comprehensive and genuine, but I'd learned to be cautious about Brooke's ability to present herself in whatever light served her purposes. "How long have you been doing this work?" 8 months consistently. "But Cass, I know that actions matter more than words, and I know I need to prove that I've changed rather than just claiming that I have. What would that proof look like?" "Time, consistency, demonstrating that I can handle stress and uncertainty without trying to control other people, building relationships based on trust rather than manipulation." They were almost exactly the standards I'd outlined to Natalie months earlier, which suggested that Brooke had either developed genuine insight or had become very good at saying what people wanted to hear. "Brooke, I appreciate you calling, and I'm glad you're getting help, but I'm not ready to rebuild our relationship yet. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming someone worthy of your trust again, even if that takes years." The conversation ended with tentative plans to possibly meet for coffee in a few months, with no pressure and no expectations beyond continued honesty about our respective healing process. Tyler had finished assembling the bookshelf during my conversation with Brooke, and he was now arranging books with the methodical attention to detail that I'd learned to appreciate, rather than find annoying. "How do you feel about that call?" he asked, cautiously optimistic. She sounded different, but I've learned not to trust my first impressions where Brooke is concerned. "Do you think you'll want a relationship with her again eventually?" "Maybe, if she can prove that the changes are real and lasting. But Tyler, I'm not going to sacrifice my own well-being or our relationship to manage Brooke's emotional needs. Those days are over." Tyler nodded approvingly. "Good, you deserve better than a relationship built on you constantly cleaning up someone else's mess." As evening settled over Austin, Tyler and I sat on my small balcony watching the city lights flicker to life. Our conversation drifted from Brooke to work to weekend plans to the future we were cautiously building together. It was the kind of ordinary domestic interaction that had once felt mundane, but now felt precious. "Tyler, do you ever think about how different our lives would be if Brooke hadn't destroyed my car?" But honestly, I think we might have continued avoiding each other indefinitely if she hadn't forced us to work together. Her deception created the opportunity for us to have the honest conversations we should have had years ago. So in a strange way, her worst behavior led to the best outcome for us. I prefer to think that we learned from her mistakes and chose to do better. It was a more optimistic interpretation than I'd considered, but Tyler was right. Brooke's surveillance and deception had provided us with a cautionary example of what relationships looked like when built on suspicion and control. By contrast, our rebuilt relationship was characterized by transparency, trust, and genuine respect for each other's autonomy. 6 months after that conversation, Tyler and I were engaged, not because we were trying to recreate our previous marriage, but because we'd built something new that was worth committing to permanently. Our engagement was quiet and private, marked by honest conversation rather than dramatic gestures. A year later, we were married in a small ceremony at Zilker Park, surrounded by friends who had supported us through both our divorce and our reconciliation. Natalie served as my maid of honor, and Marcus stood up for Tyler. The ceremony was simple and meaningful, focused on the promises we were making rather than the performance of perfection. Brooke was not invited to the wedding. She'd continued her therapy and volunteer work, and our relationship had progressed to occasional coffee meetings and birthday cards. But trust rebuilt slowly, and some boundaries needed to be maintained to protect the relationships that mattered most. The morning after our wedding, Tyler and I drove to a small town outside Austin where we'd rented a cabin for our honeymoon. As we loaded our luggage into my Honda Civic, the car that had inadvertently brought us back together, I reflected on the strange journey that had led us to this moment. Tyler, do you think we would have been able to build this kind of relationship when we were younger? No, he said without hesitation. We both needed to learn who we were as individuals before we could be genuine partners, and we needed to learn what we wouldn't tolerate in relationships. Exactly. Experience taught us the difference between love and performance, between partnership and control. As we drove toward our future, I thought about the lessons I'd learned from watching my sister's relationship implode, and from rebuilding my own relationship on healthier foundation. Real love required trust, communication, and the courage to be vulnerable with someone who had the power to hurt you. It couldn't be built on surveillance, control, or the need to manage every aspect of a partner's behavior. Some crashes revealed more than they destroyed. Some secrets, when finally exposed, cleared the path for more authentic connections, and sometimes the most devastating betrayals led to the most genuine transformations. My sister had crashed my car by accident on purpose, trying to hide evidence of her own insecurities and paranoia. In response, I'd crashed her wedding by invitation, armed with truth that she couldn't deny or deflect. But the real victory wasn't in exposing Brooke's deception, or preventing her fraudulent marriage. The real victory was in learning to build relationships based on honesty rather than control, trust rather than surveillance, and genuine connection rather than carefully managed performance. Tyler and I had both learned the hard way that love without trust was just elaborate manipulation. But we'd also learned that trust, once rebuilt on solid foundations, could create something stronger than what had existed before. As we drove toward our new beginning, I realized that the woman who had started this story, the one who had been focused on managing her sister's chaos and avoiding difficult conversations, no longer existed. In her place was someone who demanded honesty, maintained boundaries, and chose relationships that enhanced rather than diminished her life. It had taken a destroyed car, a canceled wedding, and criminal charges to teach us all these lessons. But sometimes the most important truths could only be learned through the wreckage of carefully constructed lies, and sometimes the best revenge was simply living well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.